I'd like to first give our acknowledgement to the traditional owners of the land in which we're on today. I'm here on Ghana country. Since we're online, let us all pay respects to all First Nations peoples and our elders, past, present, and future. Welcome, everybody, to this amazing episode of Rolling Through Negotiations. And when I say amazing, I mean amazing, because we've got one of my very own personal friends. But without further ado, let's keep to the tradition because I've got a pretty amazing quote to share with you. For those of you who are old enough to remember the TV show, the kids' cartoon called He Man, this quote will mean a lot to you. See, the sorceress of the castle of Grayskull endowed Prince Adam with the power to transform him into He Man. And he did this by raising his powerful sword and proclaiming, by the power of Grayskull. And once the transformation was complete, he would continue, I have the power. Where am I coming from? Why am I speaking about He-Man on Rolling Through Negotiations? And for the people that are too young to remember, who the heck is He-Man? Well, the reason why is because I've got a good buddy, a good friend, the one and only Shae Matthews. Hello, Shae. How are you, brother?
Hello, Matthew. You like to call me the Shae Man. That's why, right?
That's right. I love calling you the Shae Man. And it's almost like you're the powerful sword, or you're the sorcerer, or you're the man who can create amazing transformation. And so I feel like when we speak about the power of Grayskull, right, the transformation that takes place from Adam into He-Man, I think also that quote's very befitting for you because, guys, Shae Matthews, my good friend Shae with us today, he's an inner game coach. Shae actually specializes in removing those internal blockages that you might have, and he helps many, many people rewire their core beliefs through combinations of practices like meditation, NLP, and a whole heap of other amazing techniques. And what he really does is to help people become empowered to achieve their successes through the inner game of being a human, being a person. And Shay's a great personal friend of mine. He's someone that's taught me a lot. And in a game context, and then when we look at negotiations, I've spoken many times about the inner game of negotiations. I've spoken about the way that if we can bring our best self into a negotiation environment, we're going to be much better placed to negotiate from. And there's honestly no one better to explain what inner game of life, inner game is all about than Shae Matthews. So Shae, welcome to the show.
Thank you, brother. It's great to be here. And yeah, it's an honor.
Shae, I love speaking about inner game and I try to explain it, but there's nobody as good as you that can explain what inner game is about. So can I ask you just to begin with, what is inner game?
That's a great question, man. Well, first of all, I want to say, I have the power.
Awesome, brother.
Since you set me up with that kind of intro, so thanks for that. But basically, inner game is a title that's given to a whole range of internal human, let's say, mindsets and transformational tools, and it gets applied to different areas. So I think it originally became popularized through the books of like Inner Game of Tennis, and then it's become like something that rolled out through a number of different fields and books. But essentially, inner game means, how we look at the world, how we feel about the world, how our internal reality is reflecting out into our external reality, and the kinds of ways in which we are choosing or allowing our focus to sort of dictate the different things that are going on around us. Now, I specialize for the last 15 years in helping particularly men, but all people who want to work with me, basically, to look at, what is their current position, what is the underlying sort of situation and narrative that's going on for them, and how I can help them to move forward with more positive narratives, more effective tools, And it's very much about how we are creating our realities from the inside out. So that includes our beliefs, our conditioning, our history, our values, and also the kinds of metaphors and tools and frames that we're using to look at the world.
It's amazing when you speak like this, because it sounds like what you're saying is that we can shape the life that we live. We can shape the external happenings of our life from the inside out. Is that right?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's 100%. I think that it's not like we can necessarily just materialize or walk through walls or do these kinds of things. Even though maybe there are some people who could do that, I'm not sure. But basically, the experience that I've had is very much around the conditioning of our focus and our mind is definitely something that affects the way that we make choices. It affects the way that we vibe with other people. It affects the opportunities that we look for and the kinds of actions that we take from that point onwards. So if we look at it from a perspective of like, if we can take personal responsibility over our attention, if we can take personal responsibility over our focus, then we can have a much greater input into our own human experience. And on the baseline, that means the meanings that we're putting on things. And then beyond that, it can also create, the kinds of relationships and possibilities and pathways that we choose to create moving forward, if that makes sense.
For sure. And so you would have seen some pretty amazing transformations in this kind of stuff that you're speaking about. Like if you're speaking about people that can change the meaning of their life, or people can change their relationships in their experience of life. Like, is there any particular situation, or is there a story that you can share about a really cool transformation that you've been able to coach somebody through, and what happened?
Yeah, well, essentially, it all starts with working on the level of the conversation that the person is having with themselves, and then also to be able to help them to move forward with a way that they can feel better about themselves. So that could be very simple in the sense that somebody has a lack of confidence and they need to reframe and rethink the way that they're looking at experiences, so it's not so defeating or overwhelming, for example. Or it could be a situation where it's something deeper rooted. So another big part of the work that I do is helping people to move through various kinds of traumatic experiences to a degree, which is kind of therapeutic, even though technically what I do is coaching, and coaching is much more goal orientated. So it's much more about helping people to get to a new perspective and a position of possibilities. And yeah, I have lots of experiences of people that have come in with a certain set of thoughts and feelings, and then throughout the process of doing some coaching, sometimes it's a few hours, sometimes it's a bit longer, then they can have a very profound change. So one that comes to mind is I have a great client of mine, and he had a lot of like heavy negativity around his self-image, a lot
Hmm.
of difficulty around how he seen himself. Like he believed he was ugly, he believed he didn't have possibilities, he believed that he was kind of a failure in different areas of his life, especially when it came to relationships and the way that he was conducting himself. And
Mm.
very quickly, through essentially these techniques that I work with, which was like revisioning certain types of memories, looking at his beliefs, looking at how he was treating himself and how he was speaking to himself, we opened up a whole range of new behaviors and possibilities, which includes, he's much more relaxed and resilient in a lot of situations. He's able to negotiate and handle all kinds of different possibilities. And it's also opened up, more success in his career. It's improved his ability to have relationships. It's improved his ability to be able to explore his life in a way that's much more fulfilling without anxiety or without sort of collapsing in that kind of process. So,
Mm.
I'm still in regular contact with him, and he's constantly telling me that, basically the resources and the changes that have been made at this deeper level have essentially created like a whole new platform of strength and resilience and different types of, let's say, choices that he makes in the moments that are actually subconscious. So what the good news is that when you really make good quality changes inside of yourself, it's not so much something that's happening at the conscious level, it's something that's happening at a subconscious level, which means it's kind of automated, and it's working to help you to move forward effectively. So that's one of my examples. And yeah, I could speak more, but that gives you a bit of context.
No, it's amazing. It's amazing to hear the way that you've been able to shape people's lives. And then you speak about conscious and I think you said subconscious as well.
Mm-hmm.
You spoke about changing beliefs, a whole heap of amazing depth of that explanation. And I think it's really intriguing as well. I can imagine there's people listening right now thinking, man, they'd love to know how to change their own life. They'd love to know how to shift their own levels of internal thinking. How can they move their own self image? How can they actually live a better life from the inside out? And there's probably a whole heap of techniques that you can use for that sort of stuff as well. Is there something that people, if they're listening right now and they want to say, man, give them an opportunity to just change for a moment they're stepping into that they might be feeling anxious about? Is there a technique or is there a strategy that is available or that you could share so that people could apply? Say, for example, if they're going into their own negotiation they're feeling worried about, or they want to be able to shift their own self talk or self image. What's a resource? What's a tool? What's a way in which they could do that?
Well, as you said, there's many different techniques, but one that comes to mind, particularly talking about anxiety. So anxiety is usually a projection of a future that's not wanted, or something that's happening that's going to be out of your control with a negative kind of outcome.
Mm,
So one of the things that is very powerful is to start to work on, first of all, like what is the underlying sense of difficulty that the person is having. And if you want to have like a very quick technique, then the simplest thing that you can do in the moment, if you don't really have a lot of time to do very much, is to just practice being very aware of the kinds of content that's coming into your mind, the kinds of voices, the kinds of pictures, the kinds of like frames that you're using inside of a situation. And instead of allowing or putting a lot of attention into negative outcomes and things falling apart or things not flowing the way that you want to, just to create like positive end states that they say. So it's like, if you want to think about like what would the best possible outcome be, and if you could step into
mm,
that, if you could imagine, if you could feel it, then that's going to prepare you and put you into a state of being much more forward motivated towards that kind of outcome. Now that's definitely like a very powerful thing to do on a regular basis, and generally, I mean, that's something that I do myself on a regular basis, because everybody's got challenges, and you and me, we talk about lots of different things in life, and we've been through a lot together. So I think one of the things that we are both familiar with is that life comes with all kinds of variables and roller coasters and things that can present at different times. And
mm,
one of the things that can keep us, let's say buoyant, and keeps us like above a certain line of feeling heavy about situations, is to, project the end state positive outcome, or at least put ourselves into a feeling or an expectation of things being okay, things working out and things resolving and things basically getting to the point where, we're going to be okay again. And I've also personally experienced, as well as shared that with many hundreds of clients that I've worked with, is that it's a very powerful tool to be able to have that positive expectation and that kind of resilience of expectation about the future being good. So that's definitely a very powerful thing that you can use. And to add to that as well, and if you want to go into the deeper work, which is usually what I do when I'm working with clients, is we're looking at what's the underlying structures of thoughts, beliefs, feelings, history. What's the kind of expectations that are lingering yet again in this data bank, which we could call the subconscious, in this kind of aspect of ourselves, which we could also call the shadow as well. It's like a part of us that we're not necessarily aware of, but it's there and it's having an effect on us. And for example, if somebody's had a life where they were intimidated when they were young, or they had authority figures around that put negative impressions onto them, or they didn't have a lot of experiences of feeling validated in their ability to have authority or to get their outcomes to sort of create the kind of life that they want, then it can be very beneficial to be able to go back and revisit some of those aspects, and then to help those memories, or we could call them memories, or those parts, those aspects of the person that are still holding on to some of those beliefs. And that's belief change work. So that's about like, how do we challenge, let go of, and start to create alternative ways of looking at things so that we can move forward. And typically most personal development and even a lot of like so-called spirituality is very much based on like becoming aware of what's going on in your current state, what that's connected to in the past, and then doing work to help to change that. So I think that's a very powerful, technique in general, is looking at how to install new beliefs. And there's lots of techniques, whether it's meditation, affirmations, doing various forms of prayer, various forms of like helping to kind of like shift the focus. You can use energetic sort of techniques as well. And yeah, that can definitely give somebody like a lot more of relief. And it's very powerful. Like, for example, I was working with a client recently who, he had a situation where he has troubles with relationships. And one of the
Mm.
big things with his relationship is that, when he was quite young, I think when he was maybe like, 10 years old or so, he had an opportunity to go overseas, but the context of going overseas was going to be him as a 10-year-old guy with a bunch of like 15-year-old girls. So it was going to be him with like 10, 15-year-old girls.
Poor
So
thing.
he felt overwhelmed. He felt like he couldn't handle it. He felt like, there was something wrong with him. And because he sort of shrunk in that situation and he put a lot of, let's say, negativity around that decision affected him all the way up until now. And he's basically in his 40s now. He's quite a successful guy. He does a lot of different things. He's got a great business, and he's made a lot of things work for him. But that one aspect of negative belief around his ability to feel comfortable and feel good inside of a social situation, particularly with women, was something that was really hurting him in his relationships. So
Yeah.
we did this intervention, which you're probably familiar with, because we've talked a lot about this stuff as well with hypnosis and things. Like we went in and we started to help him to kind of grow up and to have the support that he needed in the time in his imagination when he was at that age. And really
Mm.
what he needed was sort of a healthy adult to be there to talk to him, to tell him, it's okay, and you can deal with this. And also, it's perfectly natural to feel a little bit of excitement or insecurity about the unknowns of those kinds of situations. And then that started to open up a whole bunch of ripple effects after that. So he became much more relaxed after that, and his skill set of being able to relax and not take everything so seriously pretty much changed on the spot. So it was interesting to watch because, you could see him in some sense, he was trying to be a performer. He was trying to impress. He was trying to make everybody like him. He was trying to like sort of being like what we would say is like a dancing monkey. He was like trying
Yeah.
to like get people to like him. And then once we did that work, then that dropped off, and then he could relax a lot more. And that meant he could hold space, he could listen, he wasn't trying to fill the space all the time. And it's this paradox where less became more. He didn't have to work so hard, and his impression was having a much bigger impact. So yeah, that's two very powerful things. Is just first of all, envision the outcome the way that you want it to be and get into the end state, which is it's
Yeah.
all about the feeling, not just the mental. And also looking at the memories and how to update those memories, and how you can work with that. Yeah, there's more. Once again, there's another bigger technique I'll tell you about in a bit if you want, but they're two very powerful ones.
Well, this bigger technique, it'd be awesome if we could, in a moment, not yet, but sort of during our discussion, step into it a little bit, even if it's in a way where people listening can
Mm,
go along with us
mm,
into an exercise. Maybe we can
mm,
do that in a little while. But I just want to touch on a few of the amazing points that you've shared. There's so many incredible points that you just shared, and I encourage everybody to rewind and play again what Shae just sent. One thing that I've really appreciate with Shae, and I've experienced over many, many years, is Shae's one of the best ranters around. And when Shae starts speaking, it can just be one depth of amazing information after the other, after the other. Some of the great points that you shared there, and I really appreciate Shae, was one as it was you touched on the shadow. The shadow sounds pretty scary.
mm.
And what is the shadow, and how can we be willing to step into a dark sounding kind of place?
Well, it's a great question. And I think, a lot of the connotations, a lot of the ideas that people have around the shadow do have that kind of mystery of darkness. And obviously when we call something the shadow, then it tends to have this tendency for dark mysteries to kind of come into our mind. And it's also the human nature. I mean, a big part of our human nature is that we are generally wired to to be, let's say, protective of ourselves in the face of unknowns, particularly things like the dark. Like we're worried about what's out there in the dark. And I think this is a very primal, deep part of us. So I think even just the word shadow can kind of confuse people a little bit. And there are aspects of, this idea of shadow that are uncomfortable. But in a nutshell, let's say that shadow is really a word that represents the unconscious. It represents the parts of us that we're not familiar with in a conscious kind of way. And generally, the shadow is something that we have accumulated over time. And there is like a aspect of the shadow, which could be the things that we're afraid of, the things that we are like uncertain about, things that we feel shame or insecurity about being exposed, because that could be like being seen as ugly or unworthy or disgusting or strange or whatever. And that's something that we also learn when we're little kids, right? Like, so we're little kids, we're free, we don't really have any particular roadmap or expectation of how the world should work, so we're just trying to work it out as we go along. And then we get socially conditioned, so we get conditioned by our authority figures, our parents, our teachers, maybe even our siblings or other peers around us, and those things can leave impressions. So
Yeah.
if a kid's having an experience where they are performing a sort of an action where they get shamed or they get judged or they have some kind of humiliation, then they remember that it has an emotional content to it, and then they put that into the shadow in a way that they get taught at a young age, like, don't do that. So they sort of suppress that or repress that action or that desire, and they put that into the background, which then becomes part of this unconscious mechanism. So that's like a dark shadow or a negative shadow, if you want to call it that. But then there's also the opposite too, so there might be situations where a kid might have a creative skill or desire. Like the kid might come home with a work of art and might want to share it with their parents. And sometimes, if the parent is busy or the parent overlooks that desire for the child to be acknowledged and to be like, rewarded for their skill or their intention of being artistic, then there may be like a shame that happens about that. Maybe the mum says like, oh, put that away, and we'll make you dinner or something. So the kid feels overlooked, or the dad says, oh, I'm busy right now, I've got to get back to work or something. So the kid could have like this kind of feeling of, once again, shame or lack of reward or lack of acknowledgement in their positive skill. And then that too can then become part of the shadow, in the sense that it becomes like a suppressed positive skill or aspect. And then that person might grow up believing, oh, it's not worth being creative, or I don't like being creative, or creativity is worthless, or I can't do creative things well, or something like this. So this is where the roots of these kinds of beliefs can start to arise. So we could say that shadow is really the aspect of our experiences that we've accumulated over time in our lifetimes, that have been judged as dangerous or unworthy or scary or uncomfortable, and things like that. So that's sort of the first thing to recognize, is it's not necessarily something that's bad. It's just the things that we have learned in our lifetimes to categorize as not worthy or not good, or not the things that we want to put into the front of our experience and personality.
Yeah, so we can imagine in a negotiation context, if we are sabotaged by our shadow, that can drastically affect the way that we are performing in a negotiation. And so that we're sabotaged from achieving the result that we want from the very beginning, just because of the shadow that we could be carrying with us. And so you can see how powerful it is that if you can overcome the shadow and then liberate yourself into empowerment, that really is a better place to be negotiating from, isn't it?
Absolutely. And maybe one way to think about it's not so much like overcoming as much as it's about like supporting yourself to grow into new and positive ways that can move forward with effectiveness. And then there's different ways of doing that. Sometimes we can sort of do what I would call is like a little bit of a mind hack. We can go in and we can find specific memories and happen inside of someone's life. And as I was talking about before about that client who had that shift around relationships, that could be shifted by, looking at a few different memories and updating the way that they feel about themselves, and adding some new positive and more mature perspectives to their, let's say, context of life that they're trying to work with. So if we're talking about negotiations, how do you feel about your ability to deal with conflict, for example? How do you feel about your ability to draw boundaries? How do you feel about your ability to be strong if people don't necessarily agree with you in a way that it could mean that you need to, find your own internal resources that are going to help you to feel strong, etc. So yes, if there's issues with some of that aspects of the subconscious, or the shadow aspects, these unconscious parts of us, then that can definitely be affecting the person, because what it shows up as is a sort of underlying fear, anxiety, inadequacy, and then that might come through in terms of their ability to think, their ability to act, their ability to have those positive outcomes that we're talking about before. So if we look at it like, as I was mentioning earlier, like part of the simple way to be positive and confident and to overcome anxiety is to envision positive outcomes. So positive thinking, positive orientation, like reframing and rebuilding our focus for the future so it feels good. But at the same time, that can only go so far if there is something that's at the unconscious level, something that's in the shadow that is saying that that's not possible and that's difficult, or we're not allowed to do that because there's fear or insecurity associated with that. And there can be all kinds of reasons. I mean, it can become quite intricate in the sense of like, we might grow up in a way where we believe that it's good to be a battler. We might believe it's good to be, someone who is like on the side of the struggle, or on the side of the difficulty. And a lot of people have situations where they're surrounded by authority figures where that was how it was, because you might be in a world where some people have been bad actors, some people have done some nasty things in the world or to your family, and your family's taken a position, or the authority figures around you have taken a position where you kind of want to be anti that authority, anti that kind of power.
Yeah.
And then that could leave you in a position where, it feels very difficult to actually deal with moving forward in the world in a way that is, let's say, harmonious and effective with some of these negotiations. And what that means is, people could come up against, you work in the field of law, for example, people might come up against the field of law and be very intimidated by that because they have negative connotations around that, or they might come up against, the ideas of corporations, or, big government, or whatever it is that they have a lot of negative connotations to, because they have shadow aspects about that. So to be able to like heal that and to help themselves to become more powerful and more strong and more stable inside of their own perspective around those things could definitely make them more able to, let's say, hold their own, to be grounded, to be more effective in speaking their truth and holding their boundaries and organizing their thoughts, and being able to like have an effective way forward in this situation. That makes sense.
Yeah. And what you've just shared now, Shay, reminds me of an amazing Aboriginal woman and a community leader, where we were representing her in a pretty heated legal dispute. It was in court. The battle was going for many, many months. There was even some physical threats against this particular woman in the context of all this. And then we came the actual day of mediation. And mediations can be a really emotional experience, even for us lawyers, because yes, there's logical argument, but there's also the element of connecting with clients and communicating and negotiating, and you're in there to bat for your clients. So there's a real logical and an emotional experience that even I experience when representing clients at mediations, to really be able to engage and communicate on their behalf. And we were there representing her, and the battle was continuing hour after hour after hour, getting towards the very end of the day. And we weren't really getting an agreed outcome. We weren't getting to the place of being able to resolve the legal dispute until this amazing leader, this amazing woman, she made a gesture of love in the midst of the battle. And that gesture of love amazingly then settled everybody's emotions. It took everybody by surprise. and led to an amazing dispute that was resolved in the best way possible for everybody. And so, as you speak and share about the shadow and overcoming problematic situations, I think of this particular amazing Aboriginal woman who was able to negotiate from that place of love. And I feel like that was a fantastic way of overcoming shadow in the heat of battle.
Mm. Yeah, well, she must have had some, higher resource. She's got like a deeper aspect of we could call it heart or spirit, or she's got like a stronger truth or a frame that was powerful in that moment. And whether that was intuitive and it just came through in the moment, or whether that's something that she kind of planned or cultivated in the context of that negotiation, it still has a very positive impact. And that's also something to consider in terms of, like, because we're talking about the idea of shadows is especially when we're dealing with conflict and resolution and moving through like complexities of negotiations. There can often be a lot of turmoil, right? There's a lot of underlying like sense of uncertainty, and that can very easily turn into this me against them kind of conflict based thing. But a big key with the shadow work is to look at, like, well, what is it inside of you as the individual that is holding on to that conflict, and how can you like work on your behalf of that part of that conflict? Because in some sense we could say that conflict is often exacerbated and made much worse, and in many ways kind of polarized by our own inability to see the other side, or to understand the bigger picture, or to like have like this more sort of universal understanding of how things actually work. And it's not always the case, but this is also like this kind of bigger picture that we're part of too. I think that we could even call it like a spiritual war or something. It's like it's a big kind of world of polarity that's taking place, and we all need to come to terms with that. And this sort of battlefield, if you want to call it that, of this like the opposites of good versus evil, or the different sorts of sides of different kinds of like conflicts. It's very perceptual, right? And in many ways, like we are all as individuals like part of this more universal landscape of dark and light, or shadow and this kind of consciousness that we're working with. So I think to have a balance within that, and what I'm really saying is, like, to be able to give peace, love, space, like context, and to also to be able to see on a deeper level about what is it inside of yourself that you can deal with, so that you can be a better negotiator, so you can get better outcomes, so that you can be more powerful. And I think in my mind anyway, when I think about powerful leaders, people who move culture, people who are very capable of capturing the hearts and minds of the masses in a positive way and moving them forward, they have an ability to kind of see these polarities, and then to be able to resolve them in a way that makes sense, so that the situation can be a bigger win for everybody involved.
They either can achieve the bigger win for everybody involved, or they can communicate and negotiate the reality for everybody around them. So they think that it's a bigger win for
Mm.
everybody involved. I think that sometimes you can see, I don't know, I think maybe I'm being a bit pessimistic, but I don't necessarily trust a lot of politicians and world leaders, for example. And often they can be doing one thing with a particular agenda, but then communicate a different message. And there's obviously big negotiation, a big influence that can take place amongst many nations, where perhaps what's actually happening isn't being spoken and shared in the place of integrity. Another great point that you were speaking about before, Shae, was about end state.
Mm.
And for our BJJ listeners into this podcast, there's something that I just sort of started thinking about in jiu-jitsu that also can apply to end state. So, for example, in jiu-jitsu, there can be a sequence of getting from one position to the other. So, for example, you might want to get past somebody's feet, past their knees, and then get to their hips as a position of control, as a place you want to be, as an example. And if you look at those things, there's like three chains in the hierarchy. Something I realized is if you just get to the back of the knees, then almost automatically you're at the hip. So it then changes three steps into just one. Another way of looking at that, something we do in our daily life is just say you've got an important meeting in the morning. You might tell yourself you have to be at X address by 9 a.m. So you set your alarm to get there by 9 a.m. And then automatically, by having that end state of being there by 9 a.m., you've taken care of having your breakfast, cleaning your teeth, brushing your hair, having your shower, because all those simple tasks are automatically taken care of because you've got this goal, this objective that you've already set in your mind, which is being there by 9 a.m. And we often don't even really think about, we're making those plans of being there by 9 a.m. We don't even think about those menial tasks. You know, wake up in the morning and opening your eyes and getting out of bed. Well, you don't really even think about that as part of that getting there by 9 a.m.
Mm.
But if you just focus on opening your eyes and getting out of bed, that in itself can seem like a difficult task. What I'm really sharing and appreciating when we speak about something like the end state is if we focus on the right end goal, all the little steps in between can be taken care of themselves. But if we focus too much on one of the steps in between, we can get lost in the process and never reach that end state.
Well, I think it depends on the situation, because but definitely, you know, when we can put the clarity of what the vision is that we're trying to create, then it can put a sort of a context and a sequence to things. So then we can also make sense of what do we need to do to reverse engineer that. So oftentimes when we're starting to, you know, do something, you know, we want to achieve something and we think about it from, let's say, the bottom up or the ground up, then it can definitely seem complicated because there could be lots of steps involved. And if we get focused on all the little micro details of those steps without knowing where we're going and what we're trying to achieve, then it can, you know, become quite overwhelming and feel complex. And in reverse of that, you know, there is this other sort of perspective that we can take where we look at things from, let's say, the top down or the end backwards, you know, so we reverse engineer things from the perspective of our goal. And I think that's a very powerful thing, is like, because obviously goals are a big thing, you know, and when we really think about, especially we're talking about negotiations, I mean, negotiations are about achieving some agreements, right? And moving things forward and also being able to achieve goals. And the difficulty in doing that is getting alignment and getting all the different parts that need to work together to be on the same kind of team. And that can sometimes come with some struggle and some conflict, and sometimes that can just kind of flow and line up. And I think the difference between, you know, the amount of struggle that we experience versus the amount of flow that we're experiencing is often to do with, you know, the way in which we are framing and experiencing that process of putting those little steps together. So I tend to agree with you in general, for sure. I mean, like if you have, you know, the ability to organize yourself and, you know, like you said, be there at 9 o'clock and then move through like a series of preconditions and steps that can make you get there, then that could be great. And I think this is where training also is important, like training the mind, training this kind of inner game perspective of like, what is a positive, goal orientated, effective kind of way of doing things look like. And once again, it depends on the individual, but ideally, you know, if we have the capacity to be able to, you know, to initiate, to be able to follow through, to be able to complete, to be able to, like, you know, vision the end states, then we can develop this very powerful skill to be able to like affect the world with those skills. But the other thing is it depends, because sometimes we can have blocks, right? And that's a big part of the work that I do, because people have blocks around, you know, being able to get there at 9 o'clock. So that could be a challenge as well. But nonetheless, we still need to work with like what is presenting and how we can start to line it up in a way where it can be smooth. And generally, you know, it's a much better mindset to think about things in terms of like the end and putting those benchmarks in mind, so that then you can like give yourself this orientation pieces. They're like little landmarks of focus so that we can make things happen. And that's, you know, that's about prioritization. You know, so when we have goals, we can then set up prioritization. When we set up prioritization, we can know how to spend our time and our energy, and then we can hopefully achieve our goals more effectively. Depends on the variables that are involved, but yeah, I think that's a good way to look at it. And as you are also saying with the martial arts metaphor, I think it's you know, oftentimes, especially in that sort of situation, it's very physical, right? It's like you have a mechanical situation with somebody else. It's like you're kind of playing physical chess, and you've got to like work out how you're going to like maneuver and get the situation to be to your advantage. And that can be done by, seeing those endpoints, like you said, finding that point of leverage so that you can get the outcome and win the match or whatever it is. So the thing to do with that is like that's a mindset, right? It's like it's a
Mm.
mindset of being able to see those angles and understand those angles. And that's also where, that's a big skill that you've got too, right? It's part of your job, right? You have to kind of understand the situation, be able to zoom out, be able to look at different angles, be able to understand different positions, be able to find like what's the way through this seemingly complex situation so that you can get a good outcome.
And that's where experience is so beneficial, because if you are traveling a path that you know well, you probably know the end of that path really well also. And so I can imagine it's a lot easier to be at the end state, to know exactly where you're going to end up if you've been there before. And
Mm.
so that's where I can imagine things like having a coach like yourself to help somebody understand what that end looks like, or even just the experience of knowing how to travel a particular path could be beneficial. But that also reminds me of a saying that an old kickboxing coach said to me once, which is, it's not practice makes perfect, it's perfect practice which makes perfect. So as long as you're traveling a path that you've perfectly traveled before, you know the right end state, end place, really, yeah, really well. Shay, there's something in our discussions, I'm not really sure why, but a lot of things that we're touching on reminds me of this book that you probably know well, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl.
Mm.
And the book is essentially about how to be at one, how to be at peace despite devastating things happening around you. You've read that book before as well, Shay, I'm sure.
I'm familiar with it. Yeah, I haven't actually read it in a very long time, but yeah, I came across it a very long time ago, and I do know the gist of it. Yes, I understand where it's coming from, and I think that it's pointing towards this very deep truth, which is actually available to all of us, and it's something that is a very powerful context shift. And that's part of what I was saying before. I was mentioning, there's an even bigger thing that we can do, and that can help us to be successful in life and to be able to get more outcomes of flow and things like this. And it's incredibly simple, but takes a lot of fortitude. And
Mm.
essentially what it is learning to be as much as possible in the moment and really being with your focus in the moment, where you are actually learning to experience and open yourself to the actual truth of what's really going on in the moment. So, for example, even in a situation where Viktor Frankl was in, where he's in this kind of camp and he has all these atrocities and things going on around him, and almost impossible human conditions that were being put around him. One very powerful shift that could keep a man like that going for a very long time is to sort of boil everything back down to its core essence underneath all of the things that are presenting to him. So on some level, if you can come back to the absolute present moment of what's really going on and really just being with this power of what it means to be human and what it means to be here in your body, what it means to be here connected to everything that is actually around us, then it actually helps you to almost automatically reframe things. And this is a big thing, that I've been working on myself, and I introduce my clients to when they're ready for this kind of work. It depends on the individual, because some people, it's very difficult to be able to do this, but they're not ready
Mm.
for it. But if you're ready to be able to let's say take on the practice of perfection, then you can go into a state of really learning to be with that underlying perfection of the reality that's taking place. And it sounds quite bizarre, because like, how could a man in like a concentration camp be connected to this underlying sort of spirit of connection and perfection?
Yeah, yeah,
But in many ways, like if you really boil it down, like the actual bubbling essence, or the thing that's really underlying all of that condition and all of that situation, is still actually the same essence that is creating all the light and all the beauty in the world. So on a very basic level, it's the same unit of energy, it's the same possibility. And I think this can kind of open us to a different way of looking at the world, which is that, not everything is not necessarily how it seems as much as everything is a kind of a reflection of a condition of a series of things. And if we get caught up in how it looks and we get caught up on more of the conditioning of how we think things work, then we can become kind of blind to the other possibilities that are actually available in the current moment or inside of ourselves that can help us to change the way that we see things. And ultimately, as I said, it's about changing context because, a lot of things, especially when it comes to negotiations, it's about content, right? It's about like, what's the details? What's the content? How do we organize things in a way where we can get this content to line up? And that is necessary, absolutely. I mean, we do need to be aware of like what's the different details and positions of things that are going to help us to survive and help us to be effective and help us to perform our goals and to be able to build things and create things, etc. But once again, around that and through that and underneath that is also this like sort of super state, this super perfection,
Yes.
this larger thing. And some people call that source, or some people might call that God, or some people might call that quantum reality, or some kind of like synchronicity field, or whatever it is. Like you could call it a lot of different things, but even then, we don't necessarily want to call it anything apart from whatever we choose, but at the same time recognizing that it's not about what we call it, it's about the actual connection and practice of being with that. And it sounds cliche, and a lot of people talk about this with things like mindfulness and presence, and there's lots of ways that people offer opportunities for people to have a deeper connection to that. But ultimately, it's about getting in contact with what it is that is that raw life force, that perfection field, which is actually allowing existence to even exist. It is literally like the generating force of existence itself. And
Yes.
there does seem to be some very beautiful thing that starts to happen when we are very in strong relationship with that, which is that we tend to create a sort of a resilience, a strength, a smoothness, a kind of like a freedom from the things that are the content. So it's almost like the content becomes secondary to the context because we start to see the context from a much deeper and more powerful position. And maybe that's a good quick point just to put in there at the end of what I'm saying is this, that when we think about people that are going through negotiations, battles, difficulties, what really keeps them going is the vision of the bigger context, the vision of
Yes.
like why they're doing it,
What
and,
it's
and
for.
what's
What's the battle for?
right. And then that comes down to principle, right? It comes down to like what's the thing that's underneath that. And I think ultimately, we are all in this, this field of duality and these different polarities of content that's presenting, and it's clashing against itself, and it's finding its way forward. But once again, this deeper kind of presence, this, the thing that I think Victor's pointing towards in his book is that the duality is forever going to be happening. And the duality is also part of the condition of what is necessary for things to play out. So as we are moving through the world of, form and sometimes difficulty and challenge and, the evils of different things, there is like a deeper sense of a context of goodness, and a deeper sense of a context of resolution, and a deeper context of a sense of the end is really like about the perfection coming through and working for our advantage. And this is about perspective. It's about how to hold that perspective and how to work with that perspective, which is what I teach people about it is that can be done by getting into the body. It's not a mental thing, it's a body thing. So you probably know a lot about that just from martial arts, but like when you're really in your body, when you're very present in your body, and you are experiencing this like moment in a very raw way, it's almost like you can go into these kind of flow states where you are not really focusing on the content, even though the content is taking place, but you're kind of working with it perfectly. You're sort of flowing with it as much as you can, and it gets you to the best possible outcome.
Yeah, it's incredible when you say this because even when I'm training jiu-jitsu, something that I personally find very, very hard to do is to listen to somebody explain something, but I find it easy to do. And not everyone's like that because some people have a strong modality of seeing as a form of communication. Other people might be very strong in terms of of speaking, others in movement, but there's different energetic ways, right, in which we can communicate and experience, and knowing which one of those suits us and navigating through those could also be empowering and could bring us to the place of fulfillment in our life, in our negotiations. I think that's part of what you're saying as well, Shae. But what about the people out there that might be saying, hang on, you guys are off for the fairies. You're talking about being able to, you're talking about being able to live a life or be a particular place with all the trouble that's in the world. I mean, it's there's no way, for example, man could be in a Nazi camp and have any feeling of peace whatsoever. Or if you look at the world around us right now, where there's wars going on, there's political unrest, there's nuclear bombs that people are afraid might go off. There's a whole heap of criminal activities going on, lives are being lost. There's so much devastation, destruction around us. All the stuff you're talking about, guys, it's just nonsense. I mean, what do we say to people that might have that kind of a view?
Well, I think that's valid, but at the same time, like, what are you going to do in reaction to that? So let's just say, the conditions of life are the conditions of life, and it contains all these escalations of duality. And in many ways, we are experiencing a time in history, which we've probably always experienced in our own way, that like things are getting more complicated than they ever were before. So as we look at the complications and the difficulties of dealing with those complications, including the challenges and the tragedies of those things that are happening, it's still a matter of like, well, where are we coming from? Where can we go that it's going to be a place that's going to give us some sort of stability, groundedness, sanity, effectiveness? How can we operate within this? And this is where I think a lot of people are very caught up, and myself included at times. I mean, it's not like I'm perfect at all these things. I think that I look at stuff and I think about things, and then I get caught up into various positions, and then those positions become emotionally significant, and then I have to defend those positions, and I have to fight, and I have to invest energies and resources into those positions. And like I said before, that is also true. Like, it's also relevant that if you need to invest time and energy, and you need to change things, and there are conflicts that take place, and there's various existential reasons for those conflicts that are happening. And we could break that down in a lot of ways. But essentially, and it is good to do that, by the way. It's great to break things down and to have perspective and understand like the content of conflict and the content of negotiation so that you can do it.
Yeah,
But once again, it's like, what about like where we can really come from that's going to give us like this kind of almost unperturbable, undefeatable, infinite kind of strength?
yeah,
And one thing that I think is really powerful, and we see this in some of the greatest heroes in history, is they have this heart and this will that they're connected to something that is beyond whatever the battle is, and they're also
yes,
willing to sacrifice for that. And that's part of what makes them fierce. That's part of what makes it powerful. That's part of what makes this journey of conflict resolution and negotiation actually a very powerful sort of spiritual act in a way, if we wanted to look at it that way. Anyway, it's like, because it brings the fortitude of the person out. And as you know, you've been through it yourself, and there's a lot of people go through different conflicts and difficulties. It's an initiation to be able to go through that stuff. It's going to test you. It's going to make you stronger. It's going to make you able to deal with things in ways that you didn't know you could deal with before that. And there are people and there are things that happen that are like a tragedy as well. So there are losses, there are sacrifices, there are parts of the process that are taking place, which are, part of the larger situation of this thing kind of churning through what it's churning through. But still, like, I think, what position, this is what I keep saying, what position are we going to come from as we're looking at that? Do we come from the position of being the separate entity, the victim, the part of the situation that is not able to connect with anything of meaning inside of that? Or do we sort of go deep inside, zoom out, like see that there is actually a connectedness, a purpose, a meaning, a larger sort of journey of evolution and life that's taking place? Because if we really look at it, like if we really, really zoom out, it's like, look at the whole of creation. I mean, the whole of creation has been going through this journey of birth and death and creation and destruction and putting itself together and falling apart over and over and over and over and over again. But yet again, it just keeps going. It keeps living. And in many ways, it's driven by and part of something that's like, it's much deeper, it's much more meaningful, it's kind of more eternal. And maybe that thing doesn't even exist in our world, in the sense of like, you know, we experience the kind of reflections of dualities. We experience the moving parts. We experience like the relationships of the things that are taking place. But this deeper aspect of presence, this deeper aspect of awareness and consciousness, and the choices that we can make about how we deal with that, is somewhat untouched. Because if we, you know, want to put it very directly, it's like there's really just now. It's like
Yes.
everything is just happening now. Everything that was, everything that is, everything that ever will be is only ever happening in the now. And if we're really in the now, then we're also part of like a universal happening. And that universal happening is ultimately like a force of positive, or let's say neutral positive goodness. It's like it's moving, churning, changing, evolving, and just like reshaping everything around us all the time. And, you know, I know for myself that there's a big difference between when I feel disconnected from that, and then puts me into sort of more of a sense of victimhood and feeling insecure about the situation, or feeling connected with that, which almost gives me this like very deep strength and purpose. And once again, it's not necessarily mental. There can be mental aspects to it. Yes, like saying positive words in your head is good. Affirmations is good. You know, doing things like renegotiating the ways in which you feel in your body by reimagining things is good.
Yes.
But what if the super state, you know, the real gift is to be able to like get into this direct relationship with the moment of what's really connecting us, like the spirit of now, the spirit of the bigger reality. And my experience is that when I'm in harmony with that, when I work with that, when I cultivate that, even if conditions are very difficult, and I've been through all kinds of stuff, you know, I've had to, you know, I had to escape war zones myself, and I've had to deal with a lot of different situations with difficulty that seemed impossible at the time. But I know what helped me move through it was to stay very present and to stay in this state of almost grace. And I you know, I was in Ukraine when the war kicked off, for example, and for the first 48 hours when I was there, there was a huge dark shadow of like, you know, this powerful force of the Russian military coming in. And, you know, there was 50 kilometers of tanks, and there was missiles coming in, and there was all kinds of stuff. And in those moments, it's like, I mean, I'm not somebody who's accustomed to that. That's a very scary possibility to have to deal with. And, you know, I could feel that, you know, my energy was collapsing. My whole identity, my whole position of dealing with that situation was collapsing. But then I started to realize, and I sort of switched, and it was, you know, it was because of the situation that, well, all I can really do in this situation is, you know, start to work with like the grace and the gratitude and the presence and the moment. And then just started to like really connect into myself in a sense of like, what can I really do to like pull myself out of this situation? And what I ended up doing was reaching out to certain people and opening up certain pathways. And then I got my resources together. I had good people around me. We ended up getting out of the country in a couple of days. And because of the way that I operated, you know, I was able to communicate in a way where I think I probably helped maybe 60 or 70 other people be able to also find their way out, because I was working on social media and I was talking to people, and we just like resolved it. And there was like this, so almost like this kind of, you know, superpower of community connectedness and positive human spirit of resilience that was like carrying the situation forward. Now, I'm not saying that that's always the case, and I'm not here to say that, you know, all we need to do is like pray and imagine and all of a sudden all our problems are going to go away. But definitely being in a state of presence and connectedness to our, like, let's call it our sovereign being, our like eternal state, our connectedness to this larger sovereign being, is something that creates like a lot of power and momentum, and gives us this kind of resilience in the face of the adversities that we're up against. And I think in many ways that is like the story of the big kind of spirit war that's going on. It's like nothing can really beat that sovereignty, because that sovereignty is eternal. So everything's going to present, and everything's going to move, and everything's going to change. And ultimately we're all going to kind of come and go. Like everything's going to be kind of created and destroyed in this process of eternal beingness that's taking place. but
Yes.
to be with it and to know that, and then to also like take a little piece of that as like a kind of a hero spirit, a warrior spirit, like that's the kind of power that I think really drives us. And that's something that I know you for, like we call you Matty Power for a reason. You're the
Hmm.
powerhouse of heroic energy, and it's one of the things that we share a lot is, this sort of focus on that hero energy. And I know that, you've idolized a lot of that too. And that's something that keeps you connected, like the warrior archetype, the warrior spirit, and also this kind of hero energy of, being the kind of the person who can move through conflict with effectiveness and come out like a champion. So it's a lot about like, where are we driving from, basically.
Yeah, and it's the way that we see the conflict as well, right? So it's interesting because I've never been in a situation like being in a military zone and had to escape a war in a particular country, and I pray that I never have to be in that sort of an environment. But sometimes, depending on the challenge, sometimes the challenge can be a beautiful thing in terms of giving us the opportunity to step up and find strength in us, around us, through us, and connect with others in that strength. And so the conflict, the difficult time, the struggle can be a beautiful place for growth if we allow it to happen.
And what else can we take from it? I mean, we get like, once again, there's something that I deal with on a regular basis and I help clients with. And once again, I'm no stranger to it personally. It's like, there's stuff that happens in life. It's not easy. And, we need to take a position on that. And how can we position ourselves in a way where we can face adversity with strength? How can we move through it with a higher kind of context of resources? And once again, that's the stuff. Like, if we really look at it, like, this is the soup of the human condition. Like, we're all here facing chaos. We're all here and we're going to be swallowed by death at one stage. And we've got to work out, how do we like make the most of what we've got? How do we like create the opportunities that we can? How do we move forward with some hope and dream and, ability to be able to optimize our human experience? And then that also comes back to like, what is really meaningful to us, and why is it meaningful? And I think if we boil it down, what's really meaningful is like, we get to be here. We get to be here in this body. We get to be here in this moment. We get to be here in a way where we can actually do something. And then from that place is then a matter of like, okay, what are we going to do from here for the best, for the highest, for the kind of the most optimal kind of position. And I think also when it comes to negotiations, I mean, this is something that I'll add in, is like that, part of that journey of being effective and I think being strong in the face of complex conditions is being able to connect to what is our ultimate version of ourselves in this situation. So if we were to really think about, well, what is it that's going to make us feel the most empowered? What is it that's going to make us feel the most connected? So one trick you can do is like, imagine, looking back from the end of your life and then thinking about how you're going to make yourself proud by realizing like, well, this is the kind of position that you wanted to take. This is the sort of opportunity that you made out of what you had, and then keep on moving, keep on moving. And once again, you see that, I do it myself. Like, I have to make decisions that keep people alive. I have to do things that make sure people are safe. I have to do things that take care of the people that I love. So that's, a will, that's an energy, that's a desire to want to like to perform this sort of skill of negotiating with, the eternal negotiation, which is just the duality of existence,
Yeah.
to create the best possible outcomes through, visioning of the future and creating the resources and, pulling things together in a way that can make sense.
I want to ask you something very broad and trust whatever comes up in your mind and your heart, Shay. If there's people that are listening right now and they're thinking, they're wondering, they're feeling, they want to know, what's an exercise? What's something that I can do to implement these kinds of things that Shay's speaking about? Do you have an exercise that they can follow, or do you have any guidance as to where they can go, what they can experience to be able to appreciate these kinds of things some more in terms of what you're speaking of?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's what's I said before, it's like it's incredibly simple, but it takes consistency of implementation and this kind of fortitude to keep doing it. But essentially, like being with yourself
Yeah.
and learning to be with yourself. And you could do that through a lot of different ways. I mean, once again, that could mean a lot of things to people, and people know about meditation, or maybe they've heard about meditation, or they know about mindfulness, or they've read some books on some things like this, or whatever. But essentially, we can work with the senses, we can work with the experience of the body, and we can use what we're experiencing in our senses and our experience as it shows up in time, which we think is time, like we think we're moving through time, instead to like recognize, okay, I'm experiencing whatever I'm experiencing in this moment, and I can work with, my breath. I can focus on my breath, for example. And as I focus on my breath, I can notice the body sensations of the breath. And there's something to that, like the fact that you can breathe,
Mm.
the fact that you can have a breath, the fact that you can feel that breath. And
Mm.
then you can start to add with different things as well. So, like, there's a lot of aspects to this, but maybe you can then start to feel your hands and notice, well, I've got these hands, and these hands are these kind of instruments of being able to create. And then you might want to put a smile on your face, and then realize, well, when I smile, it's not just a smile, it's a will. It's a will to move my lips and to create this
Mm.
kind of smiling energy, and then to also to have an intent behind that smile, which could be the intent
I'm
to
trying to smile. I'm trying to smile now as you speak, Shay,
yeah,
and it's starting to feel pretty good. And
and
yeah, so the next piece you were saying was the intent.
yeah. So the
Yeah.
intent is, yeah, we smile physically, and then we recognize, well, that smile can have an intent of non-seriousness. It can have an intent of playfulness. It can have an intent of sort of returning to like almost like an original innocence, in the sense that we
Mm.
can be both, the warrior in the battle doing the thing, whatever we're negotiating with in the moment, and also to come back to like this space of original connection, innocence, presence. So by focusing on the breath, focusing on the smile, focusing on the hands, focusing on different body parts, you could add the chest. You could add in different like breathing types. There's a lot of different things that can start to build out of that. But essentially,
Mm.
learning to work with the presence in the body in a way where it starts to become this unspoken non-sense, pre-sense. It's like it's a sense that's there that is actually always with us, and but we don't necessarily pay attention to it because it doesn't speak loudly like our internal voice does. It doesn't have a very strong like physical material kind of experience like when we have like a strong emotion or a different kind of sensation inside of our body. But what we can do is we can just keep working with the presence, keep working with this feeling, and it starts to connect us more and more to this nature. And like I said, I could say a lot more about it. In many ways, it is a consistent process, and in many ways, it is a way of living in an actual like experience of connectedness and a kind of a philosophy of being in creation as a creator, as
Mm.
opposed to being subject to or being outside of or being like stuck in the conditioning of that creation. And this is where it takes consistency. It takes the ability to just stay with that. But the benefits of that are that you can kind of leave a lot of the mess of attachment to all this content behind, and you can start to experience yourself as being the observer that is always in this place of deeper connectedness and a place of like non-attached resourcefulness. And then Buddhists talk a lot about this, and I think in many ways there's a lot of truth to what they're talking about, and it's also coming from a lot of different traditions, like yogi traditions and probably even Christian traditions too. They have these senses of presence and connection and having relationships, or all religions probably have this. So it's not to say that any religion or anything's really left out, because I think ultimately, I mean, we're all part of the same sort of framework of existence. And as we work with things like the presence in the body, we work with the moment, we can also start to awaken to a very powerful truth, which is that everything is a reflection of our attention. So our
Mm.
attention is really the thing that's happening in the moment, and our attention is the ultimate resource. And if we can really get back to like what is the truth of free attention, what is the truth of like attention that is unencumbered, it's restricted by conditioning. And ultimately, what we want to do in the long game and hopefully sooner rather than later, is we want to start to put everything that we experience under the jurisdiction of our actual free attention. So it's like flipping
Mm.
the game, because most people are living in conditioning and they don't even like recognize or understand that presence is a thing. But when we start to live in presence, then we can start to cultivate that to a point where it can actually start to subsume or take over or be like the dominant like condition of all that we're experiencing. And I'm not saying that this is going to be something that's going to happen in 30 seconds. I mean, this is something that might take time. It's going to take repetition. But at the same time, as you are being in the present moment, and the more you go into the present moment, the more there is no time. It's just doing its thing anyway. So it's almost like we can enter into a fairly, enlightened state very quickly. And then the job is to consistently do that and recognize that we're just really turning the awareness on. We're turning the awakened potential on, and then we can start to work with that more and more as we work with it. But yeah, that's some good stuff. I mean, that's the stuff that I tend to work with people, and I have my own teachers around that as well that are helping me to connect with that.
Yeah.
So yeah, if anybody wants to learn more about that, they're welcome to reach out to me, and I'm happy to talk more about it as well.
How can people reach out to you? Where do they go?
Well, you can check out my name, shaematthews.com, which is my website.
Yeah.
And that's probably the easiest way to find me is just Google my name, Shae Matthews. You'll also find some other good stuff on the internet. I mean, there's plenty of me over the internet in terms of videos and explanations and YouTube videos and things that people will probably find useful.
Yeah.
Most of that work is related to my coaching and the work that I've done with, the masculinity work that I do. But at the same time, if people were really open-minded and you watch that material, you'll see that it's not just restricted to any one particular situation. It's fairly universally applicable knowledge that could be used in all kinds of situations.
Yeah, because your specialty, your focus is in a game. And when you are in tune with yourself, if you're in a place of power within yourself, all that you touch will turn to gold around you. So I think that your focus, your strength of in a game is such a powerful vehicle for people to be able to create the lifestyles they want to be living.
Mm.
I think it's also amazing how you're speaking about breath because we can live with, I think probably even weeks without food. We can live with a days without water. We can only live moments without a breath. And it's incredible how many of us actually, we'll focus on what's for dinner. We'll focus on what wine we're going to be buying after work or what drink we're going to be having with our meal. But how often do we consciously focus on that next breath that we're going to be taking? And so I think it's pretty powerful the way that you've been able to remind people of that power of the breath.
Go even deeper than the breath, like be conscious of the moment that you're experiencing. And then
Mm.
if you can, like the breath is a great way to tap into that. And that's why the physical body is a great way to tap into that too, because we are physically here. It's a very powerful blessing. It's a very good vehicle. It's an amazing gift to have this body that we're working with. It gives us all kinds of abilities and skills and uh, you know connection with everything. And also, I mean, if we want to get a little bit metaphysical for a second, it's like the body is being created from and is created from a huge evolutionary process of perfection that's been taking place for a long time. So as much as we think, we're these really smart, creative, humans with all of this amazing culture and technology and whatever's on our mind and whatever all the stuff that's out there on social media and politics and dramas and stuff, like the body is connected to something much more bigger and eternal and ancient, and it's going to be there even if humans disappear. I mean, it's just going to be the same kind of like eternal nature. So by being inside of our bodies, we can start to connect with that, and that's like that's a very powerful asset. That's a very powerful resource. It's a very powerful ally to have in all situations at all times.
And I feel like part of what you're speaking about now is the life energy that that the life force that lives and beats inside of us. And that same life force is what we can use to connect to country, to nature, to other people, to other living things. So embracing and loving that life force that's in us and all around us.
100%. 100%. and once again, what is life without that? I think, that's what hopefully some of your listeners are well aware of. I mean, that's really the most powerful thing in all of existence. And I think in many ways we tend to lose that in our modern society and forget about that. And I think it's something that ultimately we need to get back to, and we need to find a way to prioritize that, because, life is meaningless if we don't prioritize life.
As always, Shae has shared great wisdom. As I was saying, he's known as Shae Man for a reason. He's got great power in his knowledge and what he shares. Shae, keep up your amazing work. You're so inspiring. We've been friends. I was just thinking a moment ago, we've been friends for about 18 years now, which is a long time. Time goes really fast. But ever since I've known you, you've continuously helped people. You've helped people in community to be able to go on and they help others. So you're like a diamond that shines bright, shines those people bright around you. And you're a great change maker who shapes a better world around himself. So keep doing your great work, Shae. You're amazing. You're inspiring, and I love what you do, brother. You're a great soul.
Thank you as well, brother. We see each other in that mission as well, because I feel you've got that same kind of hero spirit, that you want to have that bigger mission and that community of support. So thank you, man, and I appreciate you taking the time, and we can have this talk,
Brother. And I would just like to ask you, do you have any parting words, anything that you'd like to share with our listeners before you go?
Well, I just hope that people out there, once again, stay connected to their higher purposes, and keep believing and keeping the faith in what it is that they're really doing. And in terms of negotiations, having a sense of what it means to be, connected to that good spirit inside of themselves for the highest and best good. And I think if everybody has a sense of being connected to what is their best path, their highest truth, and also asking and refining and developing that. And I think that's something that you said earlier, actually, before this call, like, if nothing else, life is a daily exercise in refinement and improving and getting on path to your best self. So I think if you can keep that in mind, and then, put that around and through all that you do, then you'll come out much more stronger and much more resourceful.
Awesome, Shae. And guys, if you've enjoyed this episode of Rolling Through Negotiations, make sure you support the show and subscribe and be the first to know each and every single week when the brand new episode of Rolling Through Negotiations comes out. Thank you, Shae Matthews. Thank you guys for joining us. Us.
Thank you, Maddie. Peace out, guys.